Hey guys, welcome to this video. Thanks for tuning in, sharing in this now moment with myself and with one another. If you haven't seen these videos before, welcome back if you have. My intention is unity and oneness in the highest levels of love light. I'm going to go into a couple of topics to start off. The first topic, we're going to talk a little bit about Kundalini, talking a little bit about the energies that I've been feeling, seeing, hearing, experiencing, clairvoyantly, clairaudiently, all those good things. Some of the synchronicities that have been coming up. So just kind of an overall little chat here today and a little sharing. I'm going to show some pictures that I drew, talk a little bit about our group, soul groups coming together. And eventually, I'm hoping in the next few months, take some of those individual topics and address each one individually with a little bit more depth and detail. But right now, I'm just working with the time that I have available. So I'm going to hit a little bit briefly of each topic, and I might go into a little flow if I have time at the end. So the first thing I want to talk about is, well, first of all, I'd like to invite you to take a deep breath in and a nice long letting go exhale, and just kind of feel what you're feeling right now. Notice how your body feels. Notice if you can kind of just sink into your skin and get into a space of being fully centered and fully present with whatever you're feeling in your body. So these energies in the last week rocked me. Like I was just like, what? This is more than I've experienced in on and off. I've done these videos for maybe 3 or 4 years. And about 5 years ago, I had spontaneous Kundalini activation. And I want to go into that briefly. And then I might go into a little bit about what I've been seeing with the soul groups. I'm saying this for my own keeping me on track and talk a little bit about what's been coming up as far as questions in sessions. So I forgot to write that one down, but session questions. So first things first, the Kundalini. So I had a spontaneous Kundalini activation about 5 years ago. And I recognized back in 2012, 2011, I had a pretty big opening of energy and awareness at that time in my life, as many of you watching this also experienced. I had several different timelines in my reality where I had this crack in reality kind of open and show me all kinds of crazy things that aren't crazy after all. At the time in 2011, I was doing a lot of yoga, and for whatever reason, I haven't been doing as much as I probably should. Because I have a tendency to get kind of caught up in, writing and spiritual and sessions. And I don't always practice what I preach either. We all have those moments where, I will tell someone, are you drinking enough water? And then I think to myself, have I had any water today? So when I do this type of interaction, it's important for me too. It's always a good reminder for us to stop and tune in with our own bodies, our own reality. So the first thing is these energies that we've been experiencing, some people are very sensitive to this and some people aren't at all. And it is what it is. Every body is different. So when I had my, it was actually triggered through yoga, and it was also triggered through a friend of mine who also had a spontaneous Kundalini activation. And because she and I are very in tune with each other, but also because she and I understood what she was going through, but I didn't understand how to explain how I understood what she was going through. Long story short, boom, the physical body is going through adaptations in response to the adaptations or changes that are happening in our reality. But we could flip that around and say vice versa. The reality or earth or whatever we want to label our reality as, that includes people, places, things, animals, elements, is all changing. Nothing is the same. Things are meant to change. They're not meant to stay the same. Stagnation is not how nature works. So many of us are going through stages of adaptability. And so I have been called to really invite myself, and in doing this video, anyone watching this, to keep checking back in with our own body, how we're feeling. Are we drinking enough water? Grounding, stabilization, because stabilizing something doesn't necessarily mean stagnation. And so I'm kind of on one topic here, and I'm going to just hone into that a little bit. Just because we're stabilizing doesn't mean that that's permanent. And it doesn't mean that there won't be something else that comes up that we then have to adapt and stabilize into as well, if that makes sense. So that's one of the messages that's been coming through. I had such an influx of energy that I was sensitive to yesterday. Today's the 22nd. Although whenever you watch this, it could be relevant for you. Like I said, I had my spontaneous Kundalini experience 5 years ago. You might be experiencing it now. You might experience it next week or a year from now. You may never experience it. But so it's different depending on where we are, what agreements we've made, how we're choosing to experience this life. And so I had to lay on the floor yesterday, and literally I laid there for about a half an hour in my power place. I have a couple power places in my house. Maybe I'll talk about that in a little bit. If you've ever read Carlos Castaneda and Don Juan, the shamans talk about finding your power place, your center in your house. I have a place in my on my property, and I have a place in my house, several of them that I like to get grounded. That's a whole other topic, but it's still relevant because we're being called to connect with the earth and to connect with these lines. The words that are coming through are lines of relativity. So that's play on words. I'm gonna have to pause this just for a moment, write that down. So for me, the theory of relativity comes through song lines and dream lines, or ancestral lines come through, and relativity, and that's a play on words for me. How are we relating to our environment? How are we relating to our body? What relationship are we creating with our environment in relativity? So to us, to our needs, are we meeting our needs in that now moment? So my husband was, being that I went through this 5 years ago, he didn't understand what was going on. I didn't understand what was going on. The doctors didn't understand what was going on. And I'm going to repeat this. So if you've watched this before, it's going to be a little redundant, but I'll just say, I've been to neurologists. I've had CAT scans done. I've had, what are they called when you go in that big MRIs, blood work, you name it. I went through a period of about a year where I was in the emergency room, having heart palpitations, seeing things. I mean, it was a Kundalini activation, and they don't teach us in school in, home ec or science or physical education, PE. They don't teach us these things that go on inside of our body that aren't necessarily mainstream. But the yogis have been talking about it for hundreds of years. Our ancestors have been talking about it for hundreds of years. The Bible talks about it. Buddha and Siddhartha and all. I mean, we could go on and on and on. The Vedic texts. But we aren't taught this. And so sometimes it happens and we don't know what's going on. The doctors on our mainstream medical field doesn't necessarily understand it either, or know how to properly diagnose, partly because, and I'll just say this, it's different for everyone. So I will do more videos on this because this is becoming more relevant again in my reality, and it's becoming more relevant in people that I'm working with. Like it's happening with them as well, and they just don't understand what it is. So really understanding and meeting ourselves where we're at. So I had to lay on the floor. Extreme nauseousness came over me, extreme dizziness, feeling as if I was in between worlds. 5 years ago, I would have probably checked myself into the emergency room or gone to the doctor, gone to urgent care. And I know some people might say, well, that's a little dramatic. Well, the symptoms that some of us are having are that dramatic. I've got multiple people that I work with in sessions and friends and family members at times who have been in bed for days at a time, not knowing what's wrong with them. Wrong. So for me, I just laid down. I did my legs up the wall, which is a yoga pose, but it's just putting your legs straight up the wall and breathing. Sometimes, so I've done so many videos on ascension symptoms, and there's so many videos out there. So if you're just becoming aware of this, I highly recommend and invite you to watch those videos for further education and further understanding. Sometimes we just need to hear from someone else that we're not crazy. Now, this is where physical health becomes so relevant and important, because what I experience is if I haven't been healthy or if there's been something off, I'm purging it. So I will go through a pretty extreme purge through many different ways. And you guys fill in the blanks, is different for everyone, which will require me to really drink more water, to maybe just sleep more, to really just sit outside in the sun or not sit in the sun, right? Depending on where you live, sometimes it can be too hot, sometimes it can be too cold. So we're really just being called to recognize that there's a lot going on, and it's really ramped up. I shared a couple posts on my YouTube channel with a couple of links to the solar flare activity. Again, I am not one of those that necessarily believes in this catastrophe type prediction. I feel, from my perspective of multidimensionality and perhaps in more of a clairvoyant, clairaudient type of perspective, that is a potential in a particular reality on a particular timeline. And I want to just address that briefly, because when we have these massive surges come in, it can stir up fear, and it can stir up shadow. It can stir up all the stuff that many of us have been working on diligently to integrate, to feel, to understand, to process. And so I'm going to go into the next message that's been coming through, which again is patience. Last night I dreamed that I literally saw the word patience come up in bubbles and come across my screen in dream time. Not really had that happen before. So it's a pretty big message for it to come through, is just patience. And for me, that had multiple meanings. So I'm going to say that's the theme right now. Patience with ourselves, with our bodies. So for those of us who have done a lot of work, and then this kind of thing happens, it can be like, not again. Why is this happening again? What did I do wrong? How come blah, blah, blah. And some of you guys are like, yeah, I'm fine. I got that. But some people are like, no, I'm really impatient with this. When is it going to be over? And it's over when it's over. I've done videos on this before, so I won't go into too much detail. But what I will say is it was pretty intense yesterday for me, and I've done a lot of work. So I had to really I wanted to get up and go for a bike ride with my husband. That was what we were going to do. And I couldn't. I literally thought, if I go for a bike ride right now, I'll probably pass out and be worse off then. So sometimes we are called to get up and move. And sometimes we're floored. I was floored. Then later on, I had such a burst of energy come through that I had to move. And this can be really challenging when we're at a job, when we're on the road, when we have children that we are in the process of parenting, right? So I share this because this is where the patience is coming up so strongly. The more patience we have with ourselves, the easier it will be for us when we interact with others who may not be aware. They may be losing their patience, and that has a ripple effect. So there's a lot that's coming up right now. A lot of distortions are being seen within ourselves. We're recognizing them, and we're recognizing them within other people. And what I'm being shown is that when we lose our patience, which is a human thing, you guys, I am not all sunshine and rainbows and love and light all of the time. You know, I get angry, I get sad, I get impatient. And, you know, I've been with my spouse for quite a few years, and this is something that we really had to work on together. There's times when we've had to work on it apart, you know, on our own, meaning, okay, I'm just gonna go hang out with my friends, or I'm gonna go be by myself. I'm gonna let you deal with whatever you've got to deal with. And that's okay. Some of us are gonna need more alone time right now in order to process, because our partners or family or whatever we've got going on in our lives may not understand what we're going through. We may not even understand what we're going through. So being patient with the process and being patient with what others are processing as well. Not everybody is going to get it. Maybe not ever. And I've learned this over the years. I still experience that. I don't know what you're saying. You're not making any sense. All right. That's on you. That's okay. And sometimes I'm not even, let me rephrase that. What that does for me is it helps me to ask the question, is it on me? Is this something I'm being impatient with? Is this something that I could explain better? And if I can, I will. And I do. But if I can't, it's okay. And not losing our sight about what it is that we're here to do. And sometimes what it is that we're here to do is just be patient with ourselves, with the process, and really take the time, which is a whole other video, and commune with ourselves, with our own needs. All right. So I allowed myself that time in that space yesterday to work through the nauseousness, but I did have the human fears that came up with it, you guys. I did go, uh-oh, am I going to have to go to the urgent care? No, it's okay. Oh, maybe I will. No. I mean, it was that strong. I went immediately to the sink, drank 2 big cups of water, and then just laid on the cold floor. People might be getting chills. They might be getting hot flashes. They might be getting the spins and the ringing in the ears. I mean, I could give a list of 100 different ascension symptoms, or Kundalini activation symptoms, or body mechanics that are in the process of upgrading. I mean, whatever label we want to give it. I felt, so I gave myself that, and then I was fine. And the rest of the day was a little wonky, still feeling a little wonky, but much better. My point is at this point, my husband understood what I was going through. 5 years ago, not so much. And this is a gift, you guys. That's the other message. Again, I've said this before, recognize how far we've come. Our friends may not understand us still. However, I would be willing to venture that for most people, there are some people in our lives who do understand us just that much more. And we are being called to be grateful for that, that much more. Because if we can't see that, how far we've come, it's difficult for us to see where we're at. We have a tendency sometimes to think we haven't gone anywhere. So I'm coming back into the symptoms. Like, I could have easily gone back into a place of fear and gone, oh no, what's happening? And then that builds on itself, right? So I didn't. I recognized, oh, this happened. This is very similar, but slightly different. And now I have built kind of a support system around me through this more fully understanding it myself. Because as I processed it, started doing these videos and talked about this, now I have these conversations with my friends, my husband, my family. So I do feel that's the other message is don't be afraid to share with someone. This is how I do it with, and he gets it now. He's just like, okay, do you need a minute? All right, I'll let you. If you don't want to, do that, that's fine. Go take a nap. Lay down if you need to. Whereas if we keep it to ourselves sometimes, which is what I used to do, or I would get angry because I was in fear. You guys, sometimes people get angry as a response mechanism because they don't understand and they get impatient with themselves. And then that ripples out to their partner or their kids or parents or whatever. To recognize that sometimes that's a response mechanism to people going, I don't know what I'm feeling. I think I'm having a heart attack. Go to the doctor. When the doctor tells you there's nothing wrong with you, then we can feel a little bit more, okay, then it's something else. And that's just something we have to learn to, anyways, balance and work with. So I'm using my experiences as an example. Lead by example is what we have been taught, right? So I'm inviting everyone to not be afraid to communicate with whoever's in our lives. I have this thing that happens sometimes. I send people information about solar flares all the time because I see that people aren't recognizing or making the connection. It would be nice if our mainstream information would say, our weatherman or weatherwoman would say, hey, by the way, there's a lot of solar activity today. Just like, is it Tamika? I can't remember her name, but I follow her on YouTube. And it's good information. All of a sudden I'll see something pop up. I'm not on there all the time, but I'll see something pop up where she'll show all this solar activity or there's not a lot of activity. Again, we don't necessarily have to blame everything on that though. That's something else that's coming up. Recognizing sometimes it's our own shit that's coming up. Like it's our own stuff. Like, okay, I did not take care of myself this week. Therefore, I'm dehydrated and it's hot outside. So that's probably what's going on. Sometimes it is that simple, right? So know thyself. Recognize when it is and when it isn't. And then recognize when we're being impatient with the process. Patience in this process is part of, what do they say? Patience is a virtue. It really is practice in some cases. When we become impatient, it's a good sign for us to recognize and realize, because that's a sign that we're not in coherence. We're not in a state of being okay with the process. We're pushing. We're going against the tide, against the current. We're in resistance. So when we're patient with something and the process, we're not in resistance. So recognizing that is really valuable. Okay, I'm just gonna pause for a moment. I lost my train of thought. The other thing that came up was questioning, questioning why am I feeling this way? And I've spoken about this before, but it's relevant again. My friends Candace and Jess call me the long-term forecaster. Some of the things I've spoken about in my videos 3 years ago are happening now. So I've done a lot of light language videos, by the way, you guys. I haven't been doing as many light language videos, in case you guys haven't noticed. If you feel called and inspired and you feel good when you listen to light language, I invite you to go back and watch one of the hundreds of videos I've done with just light language, because it can be a useful tool for us to feel better. However, it isn't necessarily the end all, know all, be all to cure us. Any type of sound, and which is a vibration, which is a harmonic, as we're processing these things that make us feel a little bit more grounded, a little bit lighter, not spacier, but just, that just feels good. I'm encouraging everybody to tune into that. It may not have been something people wanted to hear 3 years ago, but now more and more people are requesting it. they're enjoying it. They're finding it because, again, sometimes it's all about timing. So not just myself, there's thousands of people out there who speak and sing light language. They write it, they put it in their artwork, as I've done many videos on it. So that's a whole other topic that might be relevant again coming up. But what I am seeing that's relevant again, that's coming up is a lot. The questions that we're asking. So I was asked in session recently a question, and so some of the questions are, where is my karma in this? What did I do? What have I been doing wrong? What lesson am I supposed to be learning here? And those aren't bad questions. Those are great questions. But sometimes when I'm in session with someone, and I'm saying session, but it doesn't necessarily mean, for me, it's an energy exchange. It's an interaction with somebody else. It's where I'm utilizing my tools to assist whoever I'm communicating with in utilizing their tools. And it's really important for us to realize we all have the tools in order to succeed, in order to see the seeds that we have planted, in order to create from and use in relationship with, so on and so forth. So some of us have just chosen in this lifetime to assist in that. And that's one of my paths in this lifetime, which I love and I enjoy, and it brings me bliss and joy. So I get asked certain questions, and part of my recognition through my intuition is the question that's really being asked, or what question might be more relevant for that person's journey, if that makes sense. So I'm bringing this to the table because I like to share synchronicities when I've had a lot of the same thing come up in session. And I'm being invited to remind everybody to ask the right question, not wrong or right, but the right question in relevance to what we're experiencing at that moment. Some of us are still asking questions from 10 years ago. Some of us are still asking questions from a year ago. And if we find ourselves asking the same thing over and over again, we might want to ask ourselves, what's a better question than that? What is it that maybe I could ask myself that I haven't in the past? So I'm being called to invite everybody to start to step away from this idea of karma, this idea of I'm stuck with this person because, this idea that I have this lesson to learn. Those are all relevant for many people still, but for some, they're no longer relevant. Maybe the lesson has already been learned and we haven't acknowledged it. And so we think we still have to keep repeating it because it's our life lesson. This could be a whole other video. From my perspective, and again, I have a multidimensional, weird way of looking at things sometimes. We'll call it weird, but I have no judgment around the word weird. I like the word weird, actually. But we have this old idea that we're here in this lifetime to learn a lesson or multiple lessons, and we're stuck here until we learn those lessons. And that is true, has been true to a certain extent. But we're coming into this new space of time, this new era, if you will, where the error of our ways, this is all a play on words. I'm seeing arrow of our ways, our arrow, eros, time, chronos, chronology. I mean, there's so much I could play with here, but we're being called to step into a little bit more self-mastery and recognizing that some of those things, so let me say it this way. What I've recognized from some people, and I've seen this in myself as well, and part of the reason I've seen so many different things, I think, is to have that experience so that I could then share it with others. And there's this idea where we think that we are stuck in a particular thing because of our karma. Well, this is the lesson I have in this lifetime, so I'm going to have to keep experiencing bad relationships, people that don't appreciate me. I'm going to have to keep going through these disappointments. And that's a loaded sentence in general because it's different for everyone. I also want to talk about letting go of expectations, and that's a video I'm probably going to do with my friend and sister Candace and Jess at some point. But coming back to the error, sometimes the arrows that have pointed us in these directions are not just so we learn lessons. What is it when we learn a lesson? Part of it is to have an experience. If we've experienced the same thing over and over again, sometimes we get stuck in those stories. And those stories then become our idea of what we are supposed to be experiencing. And that's all a play on words. So let me go into that a little deeper. Sometimes we tell ourselves certain stories, or we've interpreted certain life experiences in a particular way. And I would hesitate to say misinterpreted, because perhaps at the time when we made the interpretation based on a perspective of where we were at when we experienced that particular life experience, that interpretation was correct. The arrow at that time was true. So the arrow of truth, right? And we then recognized the error of our ways. Yet now, why is it showing up for us again? And sometimes it's showing up for us again because we haven't been able to let it go, that we no longer need to have that experience, that isn't necessarily the way anymore. That is not necessarily the trajectory that we need to continually reenact, if that makes sense. So sometimes that is where a lot of people are stuck right now. And this is kind of leading me back into impatient. We become impatient with the situation. We become impatient with ourselves. And it might just be that we're not necessarily asking ourselves the right questions. So perhaps shifting that a little bit can help us get into a different framework, put on different glasses, use a different lens, make a slight adjustment to what our patterns are and how they are when they're reemerging. It may be that it's not really, it's not the same. It looks the same, it feels the same, but it's slightly different. Therefore, how we respond to it and what we learn from it, our lesson, is slightly different. Therefore, our experience in that moment also changes and shifts. And when we recognize all of those things within that network of experience, it can close that out for us and give us closure to that particular subset of our reality, aka that particular bubble or layer of our reality, aka that particular idea, concept, or story about our reality, because it no longer fits our needs anymore. That can be difficult for some people because they're so hung up on fill in the blanks. And when I say hung up on, that's all a play on words too. Like they're stuck, hung up on a hook. They're hooked into that particular story. They're still calling the same phone number. And so that's, again, oh, this is how karma works. Oh, this is how I just keep getting called to remind everybody, let that shit go. Because it's not necessarily necessary anymore. But sometimes it feels safer, subconsciously or consciously, to continue to feed that loop or that story because it's something we're used to. We are in the habit of, that's our area of expertise. We know that we have this contract with this particular person. We know that this particular person is part of our past life connection, and therefore they're our twin flame, and therefore I could go into so many different, when I say story, it's not just about who we are, but it's about maybe what we're attached to from this lifetime, from previous lifetimes. For example, saying over and over again, I'm codependent. Well, if you keep telling yourself you're codependent, then that isn't necessarily changing. And why are you codependent? But are you really codependent? Or is it dependent upon that story that you're codependent? I mean, this is like a lot of layers here, but this is what we're being called to start looking at a little deeper. I'm also going to invite those who are asking questions such as, well, how is this person my twin flame? I had a session the other day with this beautiful starseed, and the question was really awesome. And I could see this line of connection that she had with a particular person in other lifetimes, we'll say. And sometimes it's helpful to know that information. If you've ever had a, what's it called? Hypnosis, like Dolores Cannon did, sometimes it can be really helpful to go into these hypnosis sessions, past life regression, all of that work. I've done all that stuff. It's really cool. However, we're in a different subset of reality right now. And a subset is a bubble within a bubble from my perspective, which embraces all of that. So even though we're in a bubble, we're still in like nesting dolls. So everything is still connected. However, the relevancy that we are hanging on to of those connections is part of what keeps it cycling, recycling in our reality, if that makes sense. So if I make something really important, such as this twin flame soul connection, such as this past life lesson with this person, with this situation, with Atlantis, whatever, put it in, fill in the blanks that we've been maybe stuck in for, or someone told us and it stuck with us for a while. And at that time, it was relevant. I've had people tell me about my galactic history, and I was like, yep, that's what I see. Yep. But I don't necessarily live my life moment to moment based on the fact that I have Andromedan connections. Of course I do, because that's part of who I am in my DNA, right? From one perspective. Or the fact that I had children in a previous lifetime that passed away from malaria when I had a lifetime in Africa. Pretty powerful stuff. But at the same time, I'm not sitting here saying, well, I lost children, therefore I don't want to have anything to do with children because of that then would be a story that I would relate to. Let's say I painted my whole house in African colors and I said, being what I look like now, oh, I did that in a past life, therefore I am that. But I'm not in this lifetime. And therefore, I'm here to have different experiences. But knowing that about my past lifetime did help me understand why I was having some dreams about these children who looked covered in white, really unhealthy, looked like zombies. I mean, I could go on and on. So many stories. But so I've gone through over the years, I have gone through those and remembered. I've gone into meditation and remembered. I've had other clairvoyance channelers validate what I had seen. And that was the other subject that's been coming up a lot as well. Know thyself. So if we have someone tell us something, that doesn't make it so. That doesn't mean that's really what's going on. That's their perspective. And that may or may not be correct. That's something to keep in mind as well. Sometimes we reach out to people for information and then we just base our lives around what that person told us. You're going to have a baby when you're 33 and they'll look like this and your husband or wife will look like that or whatever it might be. And we get stuck sometimes in that tunnel vision. And that can be valuable. But what I invite everybody to also look at is there's other probabilities. That isn't the only probability. And in every choice point that we make, that changes that potential. If that potential was something that really did exist, and it might have, but perhaps something happens, we make a big choice and choose to go a totally different direction where we may not even have a partner that's a male or a female, or we may not have a partner at all because we chose to be, I could go on and on. So that changes as we change, as we grow. But going back to, I went off into 5 different subjects there, but going back to patience and going back to the relevance to the stories, how much energy that we give a story is how cemented, and I used the example earlier, stagnant. Cementing something into our reality is stagnation from one perspective. But if we can make that somewhat fluid and make adjustments around that, then that can make things more expansive for us. So there's a lot of people out there who have given a lot of time and a lot of attention. Where attention goes, energy flows to a particular subject, whatever that might be, person, place, thing, sickness, right? Connection to somebody else. I can't move on because I have a contract, a soul contract with this person. Okay. I've been told that before by people quite frequently, and I don't see it that way. I see that as a possibility, but everything can be reworked. Everything can be shifted if we choose to, because nothing is set in stone. We have a blueprint, but even more so now. 5 years ago, that may have been more relevant, and that might have been held more truth to it. So I want to just clarify, that's not saying it's not true. However, that truth, is it relevant for us right now? Or can we just process that and say, you know what? It was what it was. I processed this. Done. So that's kind of where a lot of us are in this next stage of growth, is what I'm saying. So I hope this made sense for a lot of reasons. And if it didn't, that's okay too. Sometimes it's like, I always use my teacher who from algebra. I wasn't understanding it at all, getting a C in the class, let my teacher transfer out of the class by their request because they thought I could do better. They just thought, you're not getting what I'm teaching. And ended up transferring into another class, had a different teacher, got an A, because all of a sudden the angles that they were presenting from their style of teaching clicked. So mine may not click with everyone, and that's okay. So we're all kind of shifting and changing, and I'm really encouraging everybody to find someone that does. Even if you just get one valuable nugget from whoever you're listening to. And that takes me back into expectations and projection. So I'll kind of end on that note. There's a lot of, and this kind of goes back in with impatience. We'll just end on that note. I'll do a separate video with projection and expectation. But so I hope this was fun for anybody listening. Even if one person out there gets something from it, then that's awesome. And I'll go into a little flow in a separate video. So recap, patience, letting go of old stories, recognizing that we're going to have crazy body things possibly going on at different times, and reiterating that most of us are not crazy. And sometimes we go a little crazy at times while this is all happening, because it's a lot, you guys. There's a lot that's coming up. I didn't even go into the shadow and the emotional, which, by the way, I'll just kind of back up too, because shadow can also be one of those stories. Oh, I'm a shadow worker. Okay. And if you're always going to be a shadow worker, then that's always going to be what comes up for us. That's something else to recognize. That's so valuable. It's a beautiful process. It's one way, not the only way. It's part of the wave that incorporates many different frequencies that kind of braid together. So we're asking ourselves those questions. What is it that I could maybe shift slightly? What is it that I'm still holding on to belief about my reality that maybe I can let go of? What belief have I held about myself that maybe that I saw as a tool of empowerment, but it's no longer empowering? And when we start to ask those questions, because it really does come back to knowing myself. Last but not least, I'm being called along those lines, when we're projecting onto, oh, I'm with this person because of that reason. I like this type of person because of I'm a Taurus or a Pisces those are also stories. That might be true, but just because I'm a Taurus or I'm a Pisces or I'm a Libra doesn't make me that's the end all, no all, be all. It's just a fluctuating blueprint that shows us where, just like I mentioned earlier, when we're feeling impatient, that's a good signal for us that we're in resistance, to look and see, where am I not being patient with myself? This is reflecting back to me. I'm being impatient with the process. I want things, and I get it. So using it all as a guideline, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's it. Unless somebody chose to have that particular, you might choose in this moment, that's all I want to be. Well, then that's a conscious, intentional decision. And that's the experience that you're choosing to have. And that's great if that's what that person chooses. So this goes back into another topic, which is intention and consciously making these choices. So I'll kind of end on that note. What we're talking about here also has to do with us being conscious of the choices that we're making based on the intentional thought patterns, the intentional choices that we are making, what we're tuning into, who we're tuning into, how we're tuning into it. Are we listening to our body? When we are intentional about it, and when we make those conscious, I'm going to do this today, it puts more power in it. It puts the power back in our hands, and it's no longer necessarily the story that had power that we gave it, that became kind of an entity or a thing. It's just part of this journey. It's not the journey. So, okay, I could go on. In love and light, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Namaste.